I happened to leave my screen recording during my most recent run of the Imaginarium Theater, and I just wanted to go ahead and share that recording to be a bit of inspiration for other people who might be struggling through the event. As it is a new meta stage for the endgame of Genshin, I wanted to make sure that anybody who was having similar problems as to what I was having could learn from my mistakes, maybe benefit a little bit from that. This is just a bit of an unfiltered commentary, if you will, and the play-to-play of what I was experiencing, though I did edit the video a little bit to crunch it down. As you can see here, I realized while I was trying to get into the Imaginarium setup that I still hadn't built my Farzan, which I thought that I had already finished that some time ago, which I will definitely be working on since I do really like playing with Wanderer. But the theater had her running a different set of artifacts, and I assumed that they weren't going to have her at her full constellation, so I figured I would just go ahead and use mine. Here you see that I'm using as my starting cast quite a few members from the roster. You'll note that I don't have all of my top tier Pyro characters in that list. I'm not a personal fan of Hu Tao. That's just my opinions, and you can be upset with me if you want, but you know, it's fine. When it comes to the Imaginarium Theater, the setup is a lot like Honkai Star Rail's, how do I put this? The simulation that they have you playing through. The simulated universe is a stage-by-stage setup similar to this, where you can have buffs that you can buy from the monetary system that they include as a part of the simulation. Here in this version, we have the roses or flowers that allow you to, I guess, purchase new characters from your roster to join your team, though usually it's by random chance. And as you go along, you'll also encounter things that give you buffs and other, I guess, kind of, how do I put this? They're very situational effects. So I just went ahead and breezed through these first few stages. The first time that I ran through, I was using Wanderer in the early stages of the challenge, and I found that that worked just fine for me in the beginning, but I encountered some difficulties later on, notably with trying to use Chlorond and the Knave, because they are considerably more difficult for me to conceptualize how their kits work, and I'm not very familiar with them. I don't have a lot of practice with it. So, as you'll see in this first round, as I'm going through and selecting all of these boons and things, I was mostly focusing on how to increase my off-field damage, because I had a lot of supports in my team that could do that sort of, that had those sorts of skills. But as I was getting into the later stages, after I no longer had access to Wanderer on my roster, things started to get more difficult. As you can see, these early ones were fairly easy. With these early rounds, things went pretty smoothly, and I did appreciate that. But now, as I'm getting into the upper rounds, I have a lot less flexibility when it comes to who my DPSs can be, and I found that to be a bit stressful because, you know, like I said, Chlorond and the Knave are not the easiest characters for me to use. Here you see me trying to affront the Terra Shroom for the first time, and I was being very cautious about who I was bringing with me because I was really uncertain about any of the team comps that I had presented to me. I've heard from a couple of my friends that Chlorand's healing especially is difficult to get the hang of, since it requires her to use her ultimate, which doesn't always come up very fast, especially if you don't have very high energy recharge. So as you can see, that attempt failed. And I'm just going to breeze through these next couple of attempts to show you how well or not well they did. That one did pretty poorly. This one also did pretty poorly. So I restarted that one. You can save yourself a lot of time if you restart when things are looking a bit grim early on in the challenge. As you can see, I have a damage related issue. I couldn't get out enough DPS. So I decided to scrap the team that I was working with and try again with something a little bit different. Now this team was working pretty well when it came to damage output. Nothing extraordinary, but not too bad. You'll note that in this round I wasn't able to get many of the extra buffs or currency provided for the rounds because I wasn't able to meet the challenge ratings. I really am not that big of a fan of any of the defense-related challenges, either here or in the Abyss. I find them to be tedious, so I skipped most of that over in the replay. But it went pretty well with Arlecchino in that one because she has fairly good mobility.
What's our objective?
Diluc is my favorite comfort DPS. Not necessarily because he does a lot of damage, but definitely because I have him built to take a lot of hits. I found it pretty easy to use Chlorand and Arlecchino in the stages with the Hydro creatures. As you can see, that round only took me one try to get through, despite not having at my disposal any of the typical DPSs that I would be using in the overworld on my own game. Now, one of my friends has a fairly well-built Yanfei, and I really appreciate her. So I figured I would bring Yanfei with me into the Imaginarium Theater for the hard mode, because I figured I would need her. But as it turns out, I don't think I ended up using her, though I did try her in a lot of team compositions. Now, I'm sure that everybody who has experienced the hard mode of Imaginarium Theater before knows how difficult it is to take out these two Vishaps at the same time. I really wanted to use my Diluc Bennett because I'm usually pretty good at taking things out fairly quickly, but I found that it was very difficult to keep anybody shielded with Baiju's shield because it is so fragile and it doesn't recharge very fast. Which is probably because I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how to build him. So I only really made it through to Act 5 because I hit that wall and I couldn't progress any further. I decided to start again with a little bit of a different method at the beginning. You'll see here that this time I went ahead and used Chlorand and Arlecchino earlier on in the process, because I knew that the enemies in the earlier stages are not as difficult to take down, and since I didn't have as much, I guess, experience working with them, it helps to have a bit more certainty, a bit more command over the situation later on when the stages got harder. A lot of people will say that you should save those two because of their potential for damage output for later. But in my experience, I think that the characters that I have built and that I have more practice using were more effective overall. Don't let anybody on the internet tell you how to do your game. You need to remember your own strengths.
Let's do this. Stay close and you will live.
Now you'll see here that while fighting the Jade Plume, I was using Wander, which gave me a lot more mobility, and I was able to take it out a whole lot faster. I am well aware that I could have had pretty good mobility with Chlorond if I was more proficient with using her, but when I was using Wander, I was able to get the extra bonuses. Whereas before I was unable to reach that level of proficiency with the other teams that I was using. So that was a big speaker to me that I needed to rearrange my thought process to focus more on ladder thinking than just trying to use what's in front of me in the beginning. A good one to remember for the defensive challenges is to make sure that you are always using as much area of effect as you can. Which is why I ended up switching over to this team. Not only is Zhao a lot more mobile in the air, he also has a lot more invulnerability because he gets up and above the enemies that are hitting for big damage. And with Jiangling and Firezon on the team, they also cast out a pretty wide net of damage dealing AoEs while he's going up and down and doing his thing. I also used Baizhu earlier here because I knew that later on he's not going to be as useful against the larger enemies. And Toma's shield, in my experience, has been a lot more reliable in that regard. Again, always fighting the Hydro creatures is a lot easier the more reactions that you have in the party. So try to make sure that I was using characters who would be able to hit multiple enemies fairly easily, since it's quite a large crowd control issue in this particular challenge. But it's not necessarily difficult to track down any one particular enemy, so I was able to use Chlorond in that side to just kind of button mash my way through it.
My contraptions are calibrated. We may now depart.
So sleepy.
Now, I like Sayu more as a support character than Jean. So even though I have the both of them built, I usually prefer Sayu over Jean. Now here you'll see that I failed by just a little bit attacking those Vishaps, and that's because I did not knock them out within the time limit of each other the first time. But the second time, once I was being more attentive to that, I was able to knock out both of them at the same time, well within the time limit.
There is no escape.
When it comes to selecting your boons, you want to make sure that as you're getting up into the higher levels, you save some of your roses between the rounds, because I think that the boons only really take place in the match that immediately follows them, and you're going to want to have several in your final battle. When it came to fighting the Ruin Hunters, I gravely overestimated my ability to hit things in the air with polearms. Since I didn't have anybody in my party, just pretty much nobody in my party had any bows or arrows to speak of, I started to swap over to Catalyst users, but found that they were too squishy. Then at that point, it started to become an issue of making sure that I was aware of the effects going onto the field. I had not been paying that much attention to the callouts at the top of the screen while I was fighting, but as you'll see here, things started to apply extra effects onto the characters that made them lose HP, and I ran out of the energy for Cloud Retainer. I ran out of her energy pretty quick. So when I went back through and ran that scenario again, making sure to stay close to the ground so that the Ruin Graders wouldn't escape into the sky until they were all dead, I started to save up that healing for when we actually needed it so that I would be able to focus more on dealing damage at that point. Now, please be aware that stars don't give you any particular bonuses. What you need to be aware of is more about the bonus listed right underneath the main objective, because that will give you extra roses. Here I was not paying attention to that, because at this point I was high off of the idea that I was closer to getting done with this than I had been for a long time. So I just wanted to get through to the end. Here we have the Act 8 battle. The Nemesis of Capellius. And let me just tell you, it did not go well. It did not go well at all. And I tried so many different team compositions. I tried different rotations for the characters. I have trouble fighting these two on a good day, so, you know, this whole process I was anticipating a lot of difficulty with, especially since I didn't have any shielding characters left. I am nothing if not persistent in the face of utter despair.
There can be no excuse for defeat.
So it was at this point that I had to deep reconsider what I was doing, and I finally decided that I should just end the performance there and rewind. I wasn't putting out enough damage, and I thought that it would be a good idea to try and see if I could get for a reset of any of the characters. So I cycled through to see if I could get any mystery caches for toward that effect. And unfortunately, I drew Arlecchino, and I was devastated, because that meant that if I was going to get through the end of this, I actually had to learn how to use her kit. So here we are back at the predecessor to the floor 8 situation. You see me using Sayu here because she's fairly mobile and very good at getting out of the way of these big, very telegraphed attacks. I was able to get all of the roses, which was a lot. I ended up with about 200 before I went through and started selecting other things. I was very excited to get a mystery cache, but selected the wrong one because I didn't realize that they weren't going to give me a new character until after the next round was over, which doesn't help me at all because it was the last round. Here I was hesitating because I thought, where does Clorinde? Now, even with Arlecchino, like I said before, I didn't know how to use her kit, so it took some practice to get that figured out. And when I say some practice, I mean a lot of practice. And it was also very difficult to keep all of my characters alive, given how hard this boss always hits. I thought it was really funny that she got stuck in her flying animation. So here is a compilation of my failures for your entertainment.
Overruled. Don't get too close.
I didn't even realize that Arlecchino had gotten knocked out, so I just restarted that one. And I got really close to there. I was getting to the point where my cycle through the abilities of all the characters was really working. And it was also around this point that my brother was trying to console me over the whole thing. And he came in and he said that maybe it's a gear issue, not a skill issue. And I kept assuring him, I'm pretty sure that I either have a skill issue or I'm not going to be able to do this, due to the nature of the challenge itself.
Stand clear. Animal check 63.
Check this out.
In the end, the cycle that I ended up with was EQE, swapping over to the supports, going back to Arlecchino and using the charged attack, then just hitting it with a bunch of normal attacks until I had to switch out of her again, or until I could do another EQE and start over the cycle. And that was what really did it for me.
Swirl, mark tip.
Check this out.
You'll see here at the end that I was cutting it pretty close, and I was really nervous about it because, you know, you've seen this struggle. You've been here with me this whole time. And with that, when the walls came up, I was just the most elated I had been in a long time about a video game. And that's been my experience with the Imaginarium Theater. I hope that some of the advice in this video can be useful to you guys. In the end, I only got about half of the stars, but I don't really care.